Welcome to Killer Kiels, the Horror King, the show where we walk through the entire history of horror cinema, from its very first flickers to the monsters, myths, and nightmares that shape the genre. I'm your host, Alex Keeler, and today we're stepping into the 1900s, a brand new decade where horror starts to shift from playful illusion to something darker, stranger, and far more intentional. In episode 1, we explored the 1890s, the era of tricks and spiritual mischief, and filmmakers discovering what a camera could even do. But as the new century begins, the tone changes. The world is speeding up, electricity spreading, cities growing, technology reshaping daily life, and the films reflect that tension. The supernatural stops being a joke. We stop seeing comedic aspects in these films at least as much as we did early on. And the supernatural starts becoming a presence. Ghosts linger longer. Shadows stretch farther. Transformations get weirder, more physical, and more uncanny. This is the decade where horror begins to understand what it is. The tricks don't disappear, they deepen. Atmosphere starts to matter just as much as spectacle. Filmmakers are beginning to ask not just what they can show, but how it makes you feel. The films are still very short here in this decade, still very experimental, still rough around the edges, but the ideas are sharper. The mood is heavier. Horror is learning how to haunt. So, let's step into Chapter 2 of this journey, the haunted houses, the early monsters, the strange experiments, and the filmmakers who pushed the genre from playful spectacle into the shadows. This is the Horror Chronicles, Chapter 2, When Horror Learns to Haunt. The first film, as we enter the new century, is Edwin S. Porter's Faust and Marguerite, and it immediately signals that something has changed. Gone is the purely playful spirit of the 1890s trick films from Méliès. Porter isn't just staging clever substitutions or showing off what early cinema can do. He's reaching for a story with moral weight, emotional consequence, and a sense of spiritual danger. His focus on Marguerite's seduction and downfall gives the film a seriousness that stands apart from the era's usual supernatural whimsy. Mephistopheles is a mischievous imp here. Isn't just a mischievous imp, he's an intruder, a corrupting force. But to understand why the story carries such gravity, we have to look at where it came from. The film draws its inspiration from Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, the towering German writer whose influence shaped European literature, philosophy, and the entire Romantic movement. Goethe's Faust is the definitive deal with the devil narrative, a scholar who trades his soul for knowledge and pleasure, only to drag down the innocent Marguerite in the process. In Goethe's hands, the supernatural isn't spectacle. It's moral, conflict, temptation, consequence. The stakes are spiritual, and the fallout is devastating. Porter adapts only a fragment of Goethe's vast work, but he inherits its seriousness. The dissolves, the appearances, the vanishings, they aren't playful tricks here. They're expressions of corruption and intrusion, visual metaphors for the invisible forces pressing in on Marguerite's world. Faust and Marguerite becomes one of the earliest American films where the supernatural isn't just decoration, it's danger. When it comes to place Faust and Marguerite into the evolving canon, its position becomes surprisingly clear. As the first film in the new decade, it naturally sits at the top of the 1900s list for now, But in the overall ranking, the full lineage, stretching back through the 1890s, it finds a very specific home. It doesn't rise to the level of the foundational giants, doesn't challenge the spiritual intensity of the temptation of St. Anthony, or the dreamlike imagination of the astronomer's dream, or the operatic chaos of the devil in a covenant, and it doesn't quite surpass the iconic charm and the confidence of the magician, which feels more essential to the DNA of horror. But Faust and Marguerite carries more emotional weight than the purely mechanical trick films. It has more intention than the Four Troublesome Heads, more narrative gravity than the early illusions, and a seriousness that sets it apart from the mid-tier Méliès shorts. It's a film that does matter, but it's just very short. Nothing too crazy is happening in this film, but we know the background, we know the story of where it comes from, so it settles into a middle ground at number 16 overall, right between the Magician at 15 and the Four Troublesome Heads at 17. Chinese Magic is one of Méliès films that technically survives but remains almost impossible to see. A print exists, but it's never been restored or released, so it sits in this strange limbo, not lost but not accessible. Based on the Star film catalog, it was a rapid-fire transformation act wrapped in the exotic stage imagery Méliès loved, more playful than atmospheric and lighter than the stronger pieces of the year. Without a viewable print, it naturally lands lower. In the 1900 rankings, Chinese Magic sits at number 7, and in the overall rankings, it sits at number 18. We move on to the next film, another one from Méliès, and this one is called The Triple Conjurer and the Living Head. His technical precision is at full strength here. A lone magician steps forward, splits himself into 3 identical versions, and each copy performs its own trick, multiplying objects, juggling props, and finally producing a living, disembodied head that reacts, argues, and refuses to cooperate. It's all done with in-camera split-screen work, timed so perfectly that it still feels sharp more than a century later. There's no narrative here, just pure visual confidence, and it stands out as one of the cleanest, most controlled tricks of 1900. Although not very much of a horror aspect in this. A disembodied head obviously does have some horror aspects in it. And, we'll see it later on with some of, it's definitely something that is used in horror going forward. And as you see here, the head ends up being turned into a body and a woman. And then the woman does disappear at the end. But in this new ranking, like right there, yes, with another magician or a devil behind. But in the rankings, this one is going to be sitting at number 2 in the 1900 decade rankings, and at number 17 in the overall rankings for now. And the next film is a fascinating shift in early horror history. It's called The Clown and the Alchemist. This film is not from Méliès. Instead, we move across the Atlantic to the United States, to Videograph Studios, and to 2 of the most important early American filmmakers, James Stewart Blackton and Albert Edward Smith. The Clown and the Alchemist is a short trick film comedy built around a simple but effective premise. A serious alchemist attempting to conduct his experience, only to be repeatedly sabotaged by a chaotic, rule-breaking clown. Blackton and Smith were pioneers of American visual effects, and you could see their fingerprints all over this film. Fast cuts, substitution tricks, and a sense of physical comedy that leans more toward vaudeville than French theatrically. This is early American cinema trying to carve out its own identity, separate from Méliès's influence, and you can feel that difference immediately. The pacing is snappier, the humor broader, and the clown's energy more aggressive. And even though this is a comedy, there's something uncanny about the clown's presence. He appears out of nowhere, breaks every rule of physics, and disrupts the alchemist's attempts at control. The alchemist represents order, knowledge, and the pursuit of forbidden understanding, a classic proto-horror archetype. And the clown, he's chaos incarnate. And this is the part that makes the film generally important. The Clown and the Alchemist is the first known film to feature a clown in a supernatural or proto-horror context. Watching it now, you can feel the faintest thread connecting this mischievous, disruptive clown to the darker clowns that would come a century later. We see Pennywise in Stephen King's It. We see Arthur Clown in Terrifier. And while it's not horror yet, it is the DNA that is unmistakable in the future. A smiling figure who breaks reality, a disruptor who cannot be controlled. A presence that feels both playful and threatening. Placing the clown, the alchemist, becomes surprisingly easy once you understand its historical weight. It's not just another trick film, it's the first American proto-horror clown film, and the earliest cinematic ancestor of one of horror's most enduring archetypes. It's more memorable than The Magician, more thematically resonant than Chinese magic, and more culturally significant than The Triple Conjurer and The Living Head. It rises to the top of the decade, not because it's the most technically impressive, but because it's the most prophetic. So for now, it becomes the number one film of the 1900s. So we have this new film, The Clown and the Alchemist, at number 1, Faust and Margaret at number 2, The Triple Conjurer and the Living Head at number 3, and Chinese Magic at number 4 for the 1900s. And then that means in our overall ranking, we will have The Clown and the Alchemist at number 15, right ahead of The Magician at 16, right below The Cavalier's Dream at 14. And then we have Faust and Margaret at 17. Our next film brings us back to France and to Georges Méliès with The Christmas Dream, a 1900 short that sits firmly within the Fury tradition. The Fury was a theatrical genre built on spectacle, transformation, and magical tableau. And Méliès was one of its greatest cinematic inheritors. This particular film may have been inspired by a stage production mounted at the Olympia Music Hall in Paris in 1897. Méliès appears twice, once as a magician and once as a beggar, slipping between roles the way only he could, turning himself into both the architect of the dream and one of its inhabitants. The film is filled with Christian and symbolic imagery, a sheep and a lion, a jester motif that Méliès returned to throughout his career, and a surprisingly serene sequence of a church bell ringing. And for Méliès, who usually favored chaos and mischief, this moment of calm feels almost nostalgic, a communal ritual of peace rendered through early cinematic magic. So, of course, with the theme of Christmas, it's not really horror. It just has those aspects of early Méliès films that has the substitution splashes and all that stuff. And this, it is an uncanny, in a gentle, dreamlike way, though. The imagery feels suspended between a childhood wonder and something slightly otherworldly. Animated toys, shifting spaces, sudden transformations, they all tap into the same imaginative territory that horror will later mine for darker purposes. And, like I said, it's just an unusually calm sequence for Méliès here. Moment of stillness in a career defined by chaos early on. So, with placing The Christmas Dream in these rankings, it's going to be very straightforward. There's not really much to really think about here. It's a beautiful, imaginative, and technically impressive film. It's also a little bit longer than some of these other ones. It's 4 minutes long. But it does not carry the thematic, historical weight of other films. It's not horror. It's not even horror adjacent, like some of these other films, like Faust and Margaret. And it doesn't have that proto-horror DNA of The Clown and the Alchemist, or the uncanny edge of The Triple Conjurer and The Living Head. So, it lands below these other films of this decade so far, of the 1900s. It will sit at 5th in the 1900s. Strong piece of fantasy filmmaking, but just not, in that horror lineage. So for the 1900s decade ranking, we have The Clown and the Alchemist, Faust and Margaret, The Triple Conjurer and The Living Head, Chinese Magic, and then this film, The Christmas Dream. And then with the overall rankings, since it's not very much, it's not horror, and it's not none of these like horror aspects. It's just very calm and serene, and to see these aspects here with just people in a village basically just walking around, celebrating Christmas, and having a meal and all this stuff like this. So, I'm just going to place it pretty far to the end. I'm going to put it right. Honestly, I think I'm just going to put it at the bottom. I just don't, it's not horror, so I'm just going to put it at the bottom. It's a great film if we're talking about, film making in its own right. It's a good it's a good piece, but it's just, we're talking about horror, so I just wanted to kind of touch on this Méliès film, even though it's not very horror. But I'm going to place that at 28. So we're going to have, or 29, I'm sorry. Yeah, we're going to be placing that at 29 in the overall rankings, behind the famous box trick and the X-rays at 28 and 27 respectively. So yeah, this one, A Christmas Dream, comes in at 29. It's just, like I said, just not horror. So we're going to do it. We're going to place it there at the end. Enchanted Drawing is one of the clearest turning points between the magic trick cinema of the 1890s and the more psychologically playful films of the early 1900s. James Stewart Blackton stands beside a large easel, sketching a face, a bottle of wine, and a glass. At first, it looks like a simple film drawing demonstration, but then he reacts into the sketch and pulls the bottle straight off the page, holding it as if it had always been real. He does the same with the glass, and suddenly the boundary between the drawn world and the physical world collapses. The face he's drawn reacts to everything he does, smiling when he pours the wine, frowning when he erases parts of its features, and shifting expressions through carefully timed camera stops. It's primitive by modern standards, but in 1900s, this was a revelation. The idea that a drawing could behave like a living thing was something audiences had never seen before. And this is where the film connects beautifully to the mysterious portrait from 1899. In that film, Méliès imagined a painted figure stepping out of its frame and entering the real world. Blackton flips that idea. Instead of the image coming to life on its own terms, he reaches into the body, or into the image, and pulls its contents into reality. Méliès animates a portrait by giving it a body. Blackton animates a drawing by giving it emotions. Both films are wrestling with the same question. What happens when an image refuses to stay still? But they answer it in completely different ways. Together they mark the moment when early cinema shifted from manipulating physical space to manipulating the boundary between imagination and reality. This also ties back to the broader evolution of the 1890s. Méliès spent that decade making the physical world unstable, objects moving on their own, devils appearing in smoke, rooms that refuse to behave. Blackton moves that instability inward. Instead of the world misbehaving, the image misbehaves. Instead of a devil popping out of a trap door, a face on a page reacts with a personality of its own. It's a quieter kind of magic, but it's also more conceptually daring. And in the context of 1900, it stands apart from Méliès' work that year. Films like The Triple Conjurer and The One-Man Band rely on theatrical spectacle and physical transformation. The Enchanted Drawing is smaller, more intimate, and more psychological, and that's exactly why it earns a place in the lineage of the uncanny. In the 1900 rankings, The Enchanted Drawing sits at number 4. And in the overall rankings, we will be placing that at number 19 for now. The next film, we return once again to Georges Méliès for The One-Man Band, a 1900 short that pushes one of his favorite illusions to its most elaborate early form, body multiplication. In this film, Méliès plays a musician who splits himself into multiple identical copies, each playing a different instrument. The screen fills with Méliès clones, all performing in perfect synchronization, creating a kind of proto-music video spectacle decades before the concept ever existed. And it has that comedic aspect as Méliès so much enjoys in his early films. This is Méliès at his most technically confident. The timing is precise and the choreography is tight. The illusion is achieved through multiple exposures and it seamlessly fits into this era. It's not horror, but it is uncanny. And singing a single human multiply into a small army of identical selves taps into something deeply strange, even if the tone is playful. And there's something inherently unsettling about duplication. Even when it's comedic, the idea of a person splitting into multi versions of themselves brushes against the uncanny. And horror eventually uses that same concept for doppelgangers, mirror selves, clones, identity fragmentation, and more. Méliès doesn't go dark, but the DNA is there. And when we rank this, it is going to be towards the bottom. It's going to be towards the bottom of the overall rankings, and of course in the decade rankings as well. It's going to be right above The Christmas Dream, at number 6 in the 1900s decade, with Chinese Magic above it at 5, and then Enchanted Drawing, The Triple Conjurer and the Living Head, Faust and Margaret, and The Clown and the Alchemist. And in the overall ranking, I'm going to be placing this right above the Miser's Doom. So I'm going to be placing this at 24, just below the Four Troublesome Heads and The Mysterious Portrait. Next, we have The Cook's Revenge, with his Miles slipping into something a little stranger. A chef abuses a piece of meat only for it to spring to life and fight back, jumping and wriggling and turning the kitchen to a slapstick battlefield. It's silly on the surface, but it's also one of the earliest riffs on a classic horror idea, the inanimate object that refuses to stay dead. You can feel the early DNA of killer dolls and cursed objects hiding inside the frantic little gag. In the 1900 rankings, we placed The Cook's Revenge at number 5. In the overall rankings, we placed it at number 20 for now. Our next film is Méliès once again, and as he dives headfirst into surrealism long before the word even existed. The Raja's dream follows a sleeping ruler who drifts into a chaotic nightmare filled with transformations, disappearing women, and objects that refuse to obey the laws of reality. It's one of Méliès's purest dream logic films, and it doesn't appear in a vacuum. It's actually this culmination of 3 different threads he'd been developing throughout the 1890s. From The Bewitched Inn, it inherits the idea of objects acting with Méliès's autonomy, chairs that move, props that disobey. And then from A Terrible Night, it takes the theme of sleep as vulnerability, where the moment you close your eyes, the irrational slips in. And from The Cavalier's Dream, it borrows the entire structure of a dream built from transformations. But what makes the Raja's dream fascinating is how Méliès expands the technique. Instead of the simple, abrupt substitution splices of the 1890s, he layers them with tighter choreography, more elaborate set changes, and smoother timing. The tricks feel less like stage gags and more like genuine dream logic, unstable, unpredictable, and slightly unnerving. It's the moment where Méliès magic tricks start to feel like cinema rather than film theater. Yet, even with that technical refinement, it just doesn't surpass The Cavalier's Dream in the overall rankings, because that early film carries more historical weight as one of the earliest dream sequence horror pieces, as well as being known as the first horror movie filmed in the U.S. The Raja's Dream is an evolution, but not a revolution. It refines ideas Méliès already established rather than inventing new ones, and its tone is more whimsical than dark. And as we said, refinement doesn't outrank origin. So the Raja's Dream lands in the middle of the decade, more substantial than Chinese Magic and the one-man band, but not conceptually sharp as The Enchanted Drawing or uncanny as The Misadventures of a Ghost. It's fascinating early nightmare built from the DNA of Méliès's entire 1890s dream tradition, and a reminder that even in 1900, cinema was already learning how to dream. So, with that, it lands at number 5, above The Cook's Revenge, and above The Cook's Revenge and below The Misadventures of a Ghost. And then in the overall rankings, we're placing it, pretty close to the end, placing it at 29 overall. Again, above The Cook's Revenge at 30 and below The Misadventures of a Ghost at 28. Next up, we have Going to Bed Under Difficulties, which fits right into the groove of Miles' work in 1900, as he dives more into the comedic aspects of, his earlier kind of premises that he had going in earlier films. The premise of this one is simple. A man tries to go to sleep, and the universe refuses to let him. The bed shifts, and the furniture rebels. The entire room becomes a mischievous antagonist. It's the same basic setup Miles explored in the 1890s with a film like The Bewitched Inn, but with a cleaner sense of timing and a more confident hand behind the camera. The tricks are familiar: substitution splices, teleporting props, objects that attack the protagonist. But the pacing is sharper than the earlier versions. Miles holds gags just long enough to land, escalates the chaos at the right moments, and keeps the energy moving. It's just not surreal like The Raja's Dream, and it's not uncanny like The Misadventures of a Ghost. It's pure slapstick, built on that idea that the world is conspiring against one exhausted man. Even with that polish, it doesn't climb to the upper tier of the rankings. The reason becomes clear the moment it's placed next to the films that define the top of the list. This one is purely comedy first. Room isn't haunted, it's playful. The tone never crosses into the eerie or the uncanny. It's a charming piece of early cinema chaos, but it doesn't shift the genre forward. That's why it settles near the bottom of the decade, and towards the bottom of the list overall. So, the 1900s decade ranking, we have this film going right at number 8, above the One Man Band and the Christmas Dream. And then the overall ranking, I think it's going to be pretty close to the bottom, and it's going to be below the Chinese Magic. So it's going to go at 32. It's going to go right above the One Man Band and the Christmas Dream, and that's where we're going to place it for now. Next up, we have The Doctor and the Monkey, with Méliès in full chaos mode, a film built entirely on the tension between order and disruption. Doctor steps into a frame, expecting control, and the monkey immediately strips that illusion away, breaking out of his cage. What follows is a rapid-fire sequence of appearances, disappearances, transformations, all driven by the monkey's unpredictable energy. It's very much comedic aspects, very slapstick. There's no eerie undertone, no dream logic, no supernatural threat. It's pure slapstick comedy, a miniature circus of mischief where the tricks exist only to escalate the absurdity. The film is lively and entertaining, but doesn't deepen the genre or push the imagery forward. It's a fun detour, not a defining moment, which is why it settles near the bottom of the 1900 rankings, comfortably above the weakest entries, but far from the top tier. That puts it right below the One Man Band, and for now sits at 10 for the 1900s. And the overall rankings, I'm going to be placing it pretty low down. It's going to be placed at 34 then for now, The Doctor and the Monkey. And that will do it for 1900. 1900 ends up feeling like a hinge in early horror. A year where the magic tricks of the 1890s start bending towards something more psychological, more uncanny, and more self-aware. Méliès is refining his craft, splitting bodies, multiplying performers, and pushing the limits of what the camera can do. Blackton is quietly inventing the idea that a drawing can have a personality, and the whole medium is beginning to understand that cinema isn't just a stage with a camera pointed at it. It's a place where reality can be rewritten. We're still in a world of playful illusions, but you can feel the shift coming. The tricks are getting smoother, the images are getting stranger, and the boundary between the real and the unreal is starting to thin in ways that the 1890s never quite reached. 1900 isn't just a continuation of what came before. It's the moment early horror realizes it can evolve. And that's where we'll leave it for now. At the edge of a new decade, with filmmakers standing on the threshold of something bigger, darker, and far more ambitious. Because when we return, we step into 1901, and the tone changes. The scale expands, the stories deepen, and Méliès opens the new century with one of his most elaborate and unsettling visions. Episode 3 begins with Bluebeard, a lengthy film in Méliès standards at 10 minutes long.